speaking about the agenda for advancing justice. She is the founder and president and executive director of the Center for Justice and Democracy at New York Law School, where she's an adjunct professor of law. The center is the only consumer organization in the nation dedicated exclusively to fighting attacks on the civil justice system. She is also the co-founder of Americans for Insurance Reform, a coalition of 100 consumer groups from around the country working to strengthen oversight of liability insurance industry practices. She's worked on civil justice issues since 1986, when she first directed a project for Ralph Nader on liability and the insurance industry. She has many articles and speeches to her name. She frequently offers testimony in New York State. She's received many awards for her consumer advocacy. On a side note, she is a woman of many talents. She has extensive television and film experience. She was the associate producer of the highest grossing documentary in history, Fahrenheit 9/11, winner of the 2004 Cannes Film Festival Palme d'Or. She was also an associate producer of the 2007 Oscar-nominated documentary Sicko. I just call her Hollywood. So please give a warm welcome to Hollywood Joanne Dorshaw.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Carl. So I guess I'm kind of the last, at least unique speaker of this entire 4-day conference. So I'm very honored. I'll try to be succinct. It's been a day full of torts, actually a very long day full of torts. So kind of welcome to my world. As Carl mentioned, I founded the Center for Justice and Democracy. I founded it in 1998. I had worked on the issue at the Center for Study of Responsive Law with Ralph in the late 80s, and then took off about 7 years, went and did some film and television, but came back to the issue and decided, I'd worked actually at Public Citizen for a bit, and decided that what I felt the issue needed at that point was a dedicated consumer organization focused mostly actually at the state level. The issue we as consumer advocates had some great people in DC working very successfully to sort of fight back some of these bad laws. Public Citizen certainly was one of them, and others, the trial lawyer associations. But the tort system was really being dismantled at the state level. And whereas all the state trial lawyer associations all had lobbyists, and they were doing their best and continue to do their best to try to fight back a lot of big corporate pressure at the state level to change their liability laws. The consumer advocacy part of this was kind of missing. So I decided, with Ralph's help and the help of many other people, to form an organization dedicated exclusively to protecting the civil justice system, and that's the Center for Justice and Democracy. And we're actually based in New York, because I didn't want this to be a Congress and DC focused organization. I also lived in New York, so that was helpful. And when I came back to the issue, there were some differences, and I think the main difference was the amount of money and focus by corporate America on liability, on trying to weaken the liability system, weaken their obligations to act safely, not only by deregulating safety regulations, but also by limiting liability when they did something wrong. So you've heard, I'm sure, quite a bit today about what kind of battlefield the civil justice system has turned into in this country. I think probably everybody here and everybody watching has had their own rights weakened in some significant way. Probably you're unaware of it, as a result of the tort reform movement and sort of the sort of side issues that go along with this, like forced arbitration. And in addition, if you're a trial lawyer, you know how polluted the juries have become because they've heard a lot of very negative information coming out of some of the PR firms, and some maybe not even aware of where this information is coming from. But a lot of juries are convinced that there are too many frivolous lawsuits, that people go to court to try to win a jackpot, et cetera. And so even though there is clear negligence, even though people have been seriously hurt, sometimes juries are still not willing to trust that they are legitimate and their case is legitimate, and will exonerate the corporate defendants in those cases. So it's been a difficult journey for a lot of trial lawyers, I think, in the last 20, 30 years, as these PR campaigns have sort of infected people's minds. And money is clearly responsible for a lot of this. The American Tort Reform Association was formed in 1986 with about 300 major corporations and insurance companies in particular, dumping a lot of money into this issue as a lobbying and public relations force. In 1998, the very same year I formed my organization, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce formed the Institute for Legal Reform, which is their tort reform branch. It alone is one of the largest lobbying forces in America today, even separate from the even larger U.S. Chamber of Commerce itself. But I think it's not just the money. I think there's also a messaging issue that they have been able to sort of encapsulate pretty well that we struggle with a little bit. There's a great book that I would recommend everybody read. It's called Distorting the Law, Politics, Media, and the Litigation Crisis by William Haltram and Michael McCann in Washington State. But anyway, they go into a lot of how the tort reform movement has captured messaging, and they do it by talking about values like self-reliance and personal responsibility versus how they would describe it: entitlement-seeking victims who use greedy lawyers, who abuse the system. And they convey this message largely through anecdotes, sort of half-told derogatory anecdotes. They give you just sort of enough information to inspire some kind of outrage, violation of common sense. Why is that person going to court? Why is that jury doing that? And sort of the public fills in the information based on kind of their worldview of things. McDonald's coffee case is the most obvious example of that. I'm not going to go into the details of that case, but if you haven't already heard about the film Hot Coffee, I would certainly recommend that you rent that on iTunes or Netflix. It's all about that case, but also about other cases and the entire movement, how public relations have been manipulated to further corporate misconduct and to apologize for it, essentially. But that McDonald's case was not the first time that happened. And in Hot Coffee, there is discussion of other cases that were sort of the hot coffee of their day. When Ronald Reagan was president, he would talk about this, and he would make up anecdotes or half tell them. And I remember when I was working for Ralph in the 80s, there were congressional hearings where Congress brought down the actual people, the victims, whose stories are being so derogatorily told, and were just outraged at this. I remember one story, I can't remember his name, but I remember what happened to him. He was driving his wife and newborn home from the hospital and down these sort of dark roads in Oregon, and hit a deer, and the deer slid over the roof of their car and crushed down and crushed his wife's skull, and she, of course, died. The reason that they ended up suing the car maker and the auto manufacturer in that case was because they later found out that, I think it was Ford, had deliberately installed weaker roof a roofing standard, a roof that violated roofing standards, basically violated the law. And they did so in order to save money. And had they complied with the law, that roof would never have crushed down into her skull. But the way it was told, it was, oh, you know, guy's driving a car and he gets hit and a deer hits the car and he sues the car maker. And oh my God, how horrible. But you see the disconnect in the way that kind of manipulation can happen. So I would encourage everybody to be very, very careful when they hear about cases like this in the media or told by public relations firms, et cetera. There's usually a lot more to it than that. Now, on the other hand, our messages tend to be kind of loaded up with statistics. You know, the statistics are basically on our side. The number of lawsuits in this country has been going down for years. The number of tort lawsuits are a tiny, tiny percentage of civil justice cases, civil cases that are brought in this country. Only 10% of people who are injured even file a claim for compensation. Only 2% file a lawsuit. When it comes to medical injuries, which are now the third leading cause of death in America, only 1 to 2% of people that suffer through medical malpractice file lawsuits. So, I mean, it's a ridiculous also disconnect in the way people view Americans as being sue happy and running to court all the time versus what's really happening in the justice system. But unfortunately, when you argue these statistics, people don't believe them because it contradicts their worldview of things. So it's frustrating, but you sort of have to get beyond that and figure out what it is that people do like and do connect with when it comes to the civil justice system, and make them also understand that trial lawyers spend most of their day fighting with insurance companies on the phone, if they can't even get them on the phone, on behalf of everyday Americans, and against, frankly, great odds of getting any kind of compensation for people. But in addition, I think that the polls and focus groups that have been done on this issue show some pretty interesting things. They show that people, yeah, maybe generally they think people are sue happy and run to court all the time, but they also believe very strongly that if somebody has a legitimate case and legitimately injured, they should be fully compensated. It is wrong for a politician in Washington or state capital to limit that compensation. They believe that the legal system is a better arbiter of these kind of disputes than politicians are, frankly, in Washington or in a state capital, and that the legal system is the best way to hold corporations accountable, and that if you decrease the liability for corporations, then there's going to be more dangerous misconduct going on. They also really oppose one-size-fits-all solutions that you see coming out of legislation, like a cap on damages. They don't believe that a parent who loses a child should be treated the same way as someone who loses a leg or is made blind as a result of, let's say, medical malpractice. Now, the media is also an important player in all this. I have to say that I think the media has actually been getting a little bit better in covering some of these issues. If you've been following the forced arbitration coverage in the New York Times, for example, there have been a series of articles that have exposed how dangerous arbitration is for average consumers, average people, and how favorable that process is for corporations. It's a private, secretive, rigged system that favors corporations. And the New York Times devoted a lot of time and effort to a series on this, which ended up being a Pulitzer finalist last time, and they continued to devote resources to this. It, I think, has led to some significant changes, which are really positive and very optimistic. Just yesterday, today or yesterday, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services issued an extraordinary new rule which prohibits arbitration clauses in nursing home contracts. And these arbitration clauses are currently ubiquitous. They're in every nursing home contract that exists, pretty much. So I think as a result of maybe some of the New York Times news coverage, as well as some very important alliances that have been forged around this issue between trial lawyers and consumer organizations and patient safety groups that were extremely active trying to help get this rule implemented or at least announced. I think it really kind of shows what kind of success we can have when you have the honest media working, as well as all of us kind of working together to do the right thing. And in this case, here we have a federal agency that actually responded in the right way. So that's one of the reasons why I feel more optimistic about this issue than I used to. Now, media-wise, there's another problem that does concern me. I don't know how we get out of this, but media tends to report about stories about verdicts, about jury awards, by focusing on the money, and that's what's in the headline, and so wins $3 million in medical malpractice case, et cetera. And in this age of social media, I think it becomes even worse because, usually the headline is what gets tweeted around or maybe ends up on Facebook, and people tend not to read further as to actually what the misconduct was that led to this verdict. And even in news stories, if you look at the newspaper, anybody still reads the newspaper, will usually see if there is descriptions of the misconduct, they usually happen halfway down in the story, and a lot of times people don't really read that far. So it's a little bit of a problem. Still, people believe, unfortunately, that a lot of the reason people go to court is purely to get money. But I think in addition, and maybe what we're finding out now through other kinds of stories, that there's a real justice aspect to this. So many people who have been wrongly harmed or hurt in some way go to court not just to win money, they do it to hold the corporation accountable or to obtain some kind of justice, for a sense of justice for themselves. So I think there's some great optimistic things happening, even though the civil justice system, as I said, is still quite a battlefield. I think that we also share some values with some unlikely suspects, perhaps. We have been working with more conservative organizations who strongly believe in the Seventh Amendment, who believe in the Constitution. Remember, the Seventh Amendment is about the right to civil jury trial. They believe in separation of powers. They don't believe that the legislature should be telling local judges and juries what to do. There's a strong sense that local government is the right way to go, and you don't have really anything more local than a local judge and jury making a decision on a case-by-case basis. So I think another positive thing is that we've been able to find new allies in this fight. And I think it's very, very important for us to continue to try to develop those kinds of arguments and issues, to try to join with others that we may not normally join with in some of these more political fights. So with that, I guess I'll wrap up. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to learn more about what we do as an organization and about some of the issues we work on, our website is centerjd.org, CENTERJD.org, and hope to hear from you. Thank you.